Welcome to the EchoCast, episode 108. This is a podcast about The Division 2, its community, news, speculation, and updates. I am Bon Diesel. I do Division stuff, such as this podcast, Twitch streams, supposedly, and YouTube videos, sometimes, about Division 2. Today, we will have a state of the game recap, some Division 2 speculation. There's no news, let's be straight up. Some community topics, other gaming topics, and that's going to be about it. This is probably going to be a short episode. I know every time I say that, it ends up being like an hour long. It's probably not happening this time, but let's see if I can rant. I want to thank this month's Patreon supporters: Benny, Hassan, Christian, Darren, Dale, Tony, Justin, Timmy, Tim, Jimmy, Tim, PK, and DJ. If you would like to support this podcast and my other content, please check out patreon.com/theechocast. Okay, so let's jump right into the state of the game today. We had Hamish and Chris just talking about bugs and stuff. So there is no raid update yet. There are 3 different connectivity issues being looked at. They did talk a bit about there being a TU 9.1 with some fixes and balancing, but kind of pushed off and made sure people know that TU 10 is going to be like a big pass of balancing, probably or hopefully including PvP. And it might include the raid, but they seem to be pretty unwilling to lock that down. So take that with some caution. They talked about the Warhound farm and said they are not considering it an exploit, but that they are going to change it. They made sure everyone knew that the newest league that's part of the season is now available in New York City, the game, and then they kind of wrapped it up. So they talked about how the state of the games that are really light, they still think that they're necessary because if they aren't around, that people either expect big news on the next show or that they think that they're just not trying or whatever. My personal viewpoint on it is that I think state of the games should be like monthly. I don't think they should feature division shots and agent highlights. I think that should be the website like it was before, where they would do like a monthly one, which I personally thought it was way cooler a few times when I got featured in that monthly show or that monthly web series where they would have like a big write-up. I personally found that way like more like rewarding than just having my screenshot roll across the screen for 10 seconds. That's just me. I'm sure other people disagree. But I think I just don't think many people are super interested in the division highlights, but what do I know? But these light shows, yeah, I don't think, I get their understanding. I think that they probably have lots of reasons to think that it's right to do these types of shows that are really short, which is, I trust them. But I personally would prefer not to see them, at least like in a time like right now where there's basically no news. And we'll talk a bit about that, but I don't know. When it comes to what they talked about, yeah, there's bugs and there's badly balanced things and there's things that need to be fixed and adjusted. And yeah, hopefully they're working on those things. It seems like that's coming. A 9.1, whatever. Okay. Like I'll be curious when we see it. The title update 10 potentially having PvP. fixes, like that's fine. And even though I've dogged the PvP in this game basically since its inception, even when I enjoyed it, I dogged it because it's possible to have fun in Division PvP, Division 1 and 2, especially with a group. But you can take a game where you're a turd that bounces from one platform to another, and that would be fun if you did it with friends. So like every time people tell me that, like, no, you have to play it with other people, then it's fun. Then that tells me that it might not actually be good, even though it's fun. And that's how I've kind of talked a lot about Division PvP. I think Division PvP has a lot of opportunities to be fun, but not really that rewarding, not competitive at all, which is what I look at PvP for. And just not well designed and not really satisfying and not really attractive to like 95% of the people who play a game like this. So that's cool that they're going to do PvP balancing. But who's doing it? Where are they getting their information for how they're going to balance? I assume that most of that info will come from their internal analytics, which is what I think they should listen to more than the tryhards and all of the PvP people in the community. Because if you design a game for those people to be happy, you're going to design a very bad game. But there still does have to be some input taken, and I'm sure they're looking at it. It's just now that we know Red Storm isn't doing PvP changes anymore, I think it's worth saying that I would argue that the PvP was never really that great in the first place. But they have a lot of history with making really good PvP games. So I'm kind of curious to who's handling that now at Massive, who's in charge of it. I certainly hope that they PvP. I'm certainly hope they actually participate in the thing that they are in charge of. Because while I know the people who make this game play it and know it really well, I do think that there may be one bit or maybe some sprinkles of truth to sometimes some of the changes are made and they don't really seem like anyone like had like hands-on with those changes and or the things that cause those changes to happen. So hopefully with title update 10 and this PvP stuff, it'll satisfy some people. The problem is with the PvP in this game, and really this game in general, Division 2. I've said it before, I'll say it again, I'll say it 100 times. You have so many different groups of people with so many different desires and intentions with Division 2. You're never going to satisfy maybe even a majority of the player base. I've said it before that if you can release content or changes or balancing that satisfies 2/3 of the community in this game, that is a outright, complete and total victory. Because it's just, I think that there's just so many different people coming from so many different angles on this show, with this game and the player base. Beyond the fact that, you know, if you're paying attention to YouTube and Twitter and Twitch and wherever, Reddit, if you're that brave, and the forums, holy crap, which I would argue are worse than Reddit. You have to realize that if you combine all of the individuals from all of those different places, Reddit, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, blah, 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 you're talking about a few thousand people. I know Reddit has 300,000 plus people subscribed. There's maybe a few thousand people active in that subreddit, right? So if you combine all of the active people on all of those platforms where people are giving feedback, you're still looking at, like, even if there's only like 100,000 people playing the game right now, and I suspect it's much higher than that, at least like weekly unique users. I mean, it's probably still, I don't know, like a million, I don't know. I'm just gonna guess. Say it's 500,000, say it's 500,000 people. It's probably super duper, even if it's 100,000. I still think you're talking about like 2 or 3% of the community that you are hearing from in those various places. And so you just can't rely on you can't rely on such a small number of people to give input that one represents the community and two is even good. I've seen multiple times people are like, well, if they would just listen to the PvP YouTubers, the PvP would be amazing. No, it wouldn't. It would be really good for people who play in groups of four, and it would be awful for anyone else. It would, because those people want the game to be good for content creation. And they want it to be fun, which it already is, right? In theory, right? But most of the things that I've seen those types of people say that they liked about Division 1 PvP, most of the things that they suggest for Division 2, most of them aren't to make the game balanced and to make it, more mechanically impressive or well thought out or anything. It's to make it better content for themselves. So I'm kind of sick of hearing that this YouTuber with 5,000 subs and somehow 100,000 hits on their videos, weird, um, has this idea and they should do that. They probably shouldn't. Probably an awful idea. But I digress. The Warhound farm thing, I haven't looked it up or seen it. I think the messaging here gets kind of weird where they banned some people for doing some exploits, and some others, they kind of made the things they were doing not exploits technically. I don't know enough about those situations, but it seems like there's just some really inconsistent messaging here. This seems like another situation like that. But what are you gonna do? That's kind of where I stand on it. I have better things to be mad about or worried about. So if you want to do the Warhound farm, go nuts. That's until it gets fixed. The new league being available in NYC, it's cool. It gave me, I played and knocked out the manhunt target. It's a Jupiter or Venus, whatever, some planet. And it was fine. The leagues are cool. It's a reason to kind of make you redo some of the missions and some activities. I just, these season things, man, I think they're cool. I like them in theory. But I played this whole last manhunt target, right? Where you do the Coney missions, which I forgot. Those missions are really, really good. They're great. And then I did the missions in NYC and did some bounties and did the control points. And and then I found the target and I killed her. And it was just like, okay, that was fine. There was just, but it's just a bummer that manhunt target is just so, ugh. It's just a bounty and you just go kill this relatively powerful NPC. And then it's just, the worst part is after you kill him is hearing Manny, especially here in NYC, but hearing Manny back in DC saying, "Good job, Sheriff. You got him. You earned yourself another." It's like, why is that audio active for these manhunts? Like, no. That's what's kind of makes it feel cheap, it makes it just feel like a regular bounty they just stuck another skin on. And that doesn't even get me started on my whole point of after you beat Warlords of New York, which I actually found to be a really great, like, compact new story. Like, I liked it. It took me 10-ish hours to play through. It was really exciting. I liked it a lot. I really enjoyed the story that they brought. But it will never fail to drive me crazy that you do that. And then you go back to DC and it's just business as usual. Like, I swore that you would go back to DC and the first thing you would see is a cutscene with Manny and whoever, Kelso, and where Manny be like, "Hey, welcome back. It sounds like you did some good work there, but man, what's going on with this rogue faction?" And Kelso could be like, "Yeah, we didn't know that Fei Lao was gonna blah blah." They could have like reintroduced that a little more smoothly. I don't know. It's fine. Anyways, but yeah, so that was the state of the game. That's what I think about it. It's fine. I know why they do these short or lack of information shows. Um, I that they're in such a damned if they do, damned if they don't situation with this game and with the communication with it. And um, I don't know what I would do differently if I have to be honest. So I'm glad a bunch of this stuff is getting fixed. It looks like there's some cool stuff. I mean, I'm excited that the raid's coming. I've actually still never finished the first raid. I've finished it in the easy mode just because one night I randomly decided to match make it and see how it went. Oddly enough, obviously the easy mode is way easier than regular, the normal difficulty. But funny enough, there were 8 people. Only one person was using the mic, and they just told everyone what to do. And we didn't wipe once, and we actually got through it really quickly. Again, it was the easy mode, so it's not nearly as hard. But it's kind of funny that it was actually really actually kind of fun because that person really made it interesting. So yeah, yeah. Okay, we're gonna do the mid roll, and then we'll be right back. Okay. Division 2 topics. So this is how you know I'm getting desperate. Let's talk about Division 3. So I've been pretty public if you pay attention to my Twitter and things like that. God save ya if you do. About how I guess I'm a little concerned that the next year and a half of Division 2 is going to be few seasons, the raid, maybe another raid next year or something. Um, and I'm starting to get a feeling that that's probably it. And that's fine. And even for someone like me who only has a few hours a week to play at this point, fine, cool. I'll keep coming back. I'll keep doing the things, but that will be a pretty sour taste if that's what happens. Um, one reason because it seems like there's still things left to explore. This whole rogue faction thing, I assume. I mean, they are dropping bits of story in this manhunt seasonal thing. Kind of. I mean, it's kind of shallow, but it's there. Um, but like they're obviously, there's a whole fail out plot now, right? Where I remember when I beat Warlords of New York, and I remember thinking like, we aren't going to resolve this in Division 2. This development is going to be a Division 3 story arc, I think. Which is fine, but there's things that still remain. It's weird. It's what I said before about when you go back to back to DC after Warlords. Before Warlords came out, the episode 3 of Year 1, which was the episodes of Year 1, like just such a disappointment in hindsight. But like in episode 3, you go to Coney Island and you save Chernenko, and you bring him. In theory, supposedly you brought him back to DC to work on the bioreactor to create a cure. But you beat Warlords, and then your character goes back to DC, and Chernenko's nowhere to be found. So I assume that plot point, like I assume hopefully at some point they expand on that, and you at least walk into that bioreactor room and he's in there tooling around, but I don't know. There's the whole thing with the castle settlement down in the southern part of DC, which the first time I played through the story, that it was a cool development. Like that was like, holy crap, they just wiped out that settlement that we never even got to like explore. And then you do explore the remains of it, and to me it seems so obvious, like, oh, there's going to be like some type of activity that encourages us to rebuild the castle. I, silly me, even had the crazy idea of like, man, what if we get to be the one who runs this settlement and we, do work to bring things back to the settlement and bring people back, clean it up, and then we get to like, I don't know, profit some way or choose what type of vendors come in or have some impact on this thing. Even if we don't get to choose anything, it still would have been cool to be like, hey agent, why don't you run this settlement? I don't know. I think that would have been cool. But at this point, I wonder if I still think that settlement at one point was planned to be brought back. But now I kind of wonder, like, is Ubisoft pulling back? Like, what are they doing? So with all of that said, we can talk about what could have happened in Division 2 in like a year from now, and when it's probably really going to be finalized. But for Division 3, so what I'll do is I'll throw out my vision for Division 3 and what I would like to see. What I'm going to say is it's going to piss people off because it's very different than what we have. And it's not going to happen. Like, I'm not actually going to bet anything, but what bums me out about my idea is that I would really like it. And I think it would appeal to a much larger player base than Division 1 and 2 currently does. But I don't think it's the vision for the franchise, and that's fine. My main thing is that I hope that whatever Division 3 is, if we get one, I think that's fair to point out that there's no guarantee we get a Division 3. But if we do, this time I hope that Ubisoft, the main thing is their goal is to beat Destiny. Maybe Division 3 comes out around the same time as a Destiny 3. And what I've kind of settled on is that Division 1 was probably meant to be bigger than it ended up being due to its issues at release. And then probably got scaled back. And then Division 2, I guess I went into Division 2 thinking it was, the whole goal was to be the game, to be the looter shooter, to be the, light MMO, to be the one, to be the best. And I think from like the perspective of like the developers, I still think that was and probably is still the goal. But now I'm starting to have a feeling that there's probably things that like developers would have loved to do. And I may have a reason to believe this or not. I don't know. I'm just speculating, right? But I have a feeling that the way the game was funded and the limitations put on the developers by Ubisoft have probably now made this game kind of make a sequel, improve some things, try some new stuff, and see how it goes. Make a nice game, make a good game, and whatever. But I can't help but feel like the goal for this game was never to be better than Destiny, and that would be a pretty tall order, right? I mean, Bungie is Destiny. Like literally that entire development studio is Destiny 2. Now I know that supposedly they're working on, well, probably Destiny 3, and supposedly there's another game they're working on, but still, it's like Ubisoft, I'm sure as a whole is significantly larger than Bungie, but it's almost as if like if Ubisoft made one game and it was their 100% focus to make that game as good as possible. Not to say that Destiny's perfect, because it's not. I see plenty of complaints about it. And it's actually something I point out when people complain about Division. It's like, hey, the best game in this genre still is very imperfect. Division 2 and Destiny 2 are much closer than they aren't in a lot of ways. I would argue, of course, which means nothing. But I just, I think this time, for me, it's almost like if Division 3 isn't meant to be like a blockbuster statement game, then I would almost say don't make it, because the Division, even from Division 1, before it even came out, in my opinion, is still conceptually one of the coolest ideas for a video game ever conceive, in my opinion. It's just such a cool idea, and the aesthetics of it, the kind of future tech, but also gritty realism. Um, it does something that almost no concept for a game can do, because it feels real, but not at the same time. It feels like it could happen, especially in our current pandemic situation that we're dealing with. We're kind of seeing what this would actually look like, and it doesn't look a whole lot different than Division. Just without the secret agents running around killing people warrant without warrant. But it's just from a concept point of view, and I sometimes I almost think the potential of Division is one of its greatest enemies, is because everyone has so many cool ideas for what they want the Division to be, and this is probably from the devs down to us players, that there's just no way those visions can ever come to fruition. Not for everyone. But here's my idea for Division 3. We're finally getting to it. I'm stretching this episode. So I'm just going to read it and then we'll talk. So basically 3 parts here. So I want a more story-based but similar formula to the way that the current game is. So you get into the world and you are doing something, you're recovering something, you're bringing something back. And I still want there to be, so this is kind of talking about like the single player or the co-op experience. So you go into whatever new city or whatever, however they do that, you do all the missions, and then you hit an end game, and there is some type of replayable. Maybe something more like Destiny 2. Maybe there's a bunch of small areas. Maybe it's still a big area, but it's a little more focused. And the biggest difference in this idea is that there's no traditional, quote unquote, you're watching the video, you see my quotes. There's no DZ. Not the way we know it now. There's not some doors on the edge of the map that take you into a DZ. Doesn't exist. And the reason I say that, I talked about it, I think last week, is that much like Division in general, the concept of a DZ is so cool. The idea of it. But just like I said last week, that when that civil engineer designs that sidewalk to go around the tree, people are still going to walk through the grass. And because you can't make players play the way you want them to without taking away like so much from your games, the DZ will never play out the way it's supposed to. And then what you have in the DZ that some people envision, I think is just it's not fun, it's not satisfying, and it's kind of what we have now, where there's a very, very, very few people who have any desire to have anything to do with it, and the ones that do, I think have very questionable motives. They don't care if the game's good, they just want their experience to be fun. I think there's some conversation to be had there on what's good or bad about that, but I'll leave that for another time. So story-based, really, honestly, a more focused, maybe even a more linear story to start. And then when you finish the story, it opens up to kind of maybe something like what we have right now in the LZ. Okay, the second part of Division 3 that I would like to see is a conflict mode that just either completely or mostly ditches the RPG elements, or has a significantly different balancing system, kind of like what we had when the Division 2 released, and it normalized without killing people's builds, because that was a big problem with the normalization. I think that the Destiny PvP could be a good example on how this would look, especially in the way that they involve it with the rest of the game. They do events and they do trials and stuff like that. Because Conflict in Division 2 came out, they did some changes. They released a new mode for some reason, which I've heard most people actually say is the best mode, is team elimination. And that's been it. There's been no events. There's been no real reason to go in there and play it. And so you have a separate conflict mode that's maybe it shares the gear, maybe it doesn't. I mean, I think that there's some conversations to be had there. And then you have the DZ as a third part of this game. And I think the DZ should be turned into a survival slash battle royale ish slash escape from Tarkov, maybe type of thing, where it's almost like a whole separate thing. Maybe it's like a free to play component if it's going to be like a BR, right? Where you take parts of the game you know people like, take from survival what you know people liked, and then you add other stuff. You make it a separate thing. It's still the Division, it's still part of that world, but it can take place in a different part of the world. It's a separate thing, because I argued it last week, and I'll argue it basically probably forever, or at least until I'm proven wrong, that the concept of the DZ is super cool and it's a complete failure. It's a time suck. It's a huge point of contention in the community and a huge source of the toxicity in the game and in the community especially. And I think at some point you have to be able to close a book and just say, hey, we tried. This was a neat concept, but in reality, it just doesn't work, or we don't have the ability to make it work, whatever. But at some point you have to cut and you have to try something different. And I think a Division 3 should try something significantly different. So there's my idea. This is definitely where, if people have made it this deep in the episode, please let me know what you think. And I would be curious to how people would react to such a big change. In general, I wouldn't hate the idea of them just changing everything. Turn it into Future Soldier 2. Turn it into a more tactical, more realistic damage model. Get rid of most of the RPG elements. Turn it into a badass mission-based single-player game. Have some cool multiplayer attached to it. Have a BR mode with the DZ. Make it a completely different game for all I care. Just try something very different. Division 2 and 1 are different. I think Division 2 is superior in almost every way. But they changed a lot, and I think that's good. But they're still basically the same game. What I'm talking about is go a completely different direction. Kind of the way that Assassin's Creed went from the regular Assassin's Creed to Origins, and then especially Odyssey, where they took that franchise a completely different direction by turning it into an RPG, which it wasn't before. What I'm saying is essentially do that, but like the opposite, potentially. Just mix it up, try something new. Well, I think Ubisoft hopefully has learned from the disaster that Breakpoint was, and from, Division sold pretty well, and it's not a bad game, but it obviously didn't reach the heights they wanted it to the point where I still think the biggest issue was Breakpoint, but I'm sure Division didn't help. But they literally delayed all of their games that were supposed to come out in 2020. Now, the whole COVID-19 situation, maybe that ended up being a good thing for them. But it seems like Ubisoft is essentially trying to reevaluate how they even consider concepts of games that are going to be made under their name. And so I hope that if they go forward with a Division 3, whether it's with Massive or maybe even a different studio, I don't know. Maybe they just say, hey, let's just try something different. Division 1 and 2 had a lot of the same issues. We saw improvement, but we also saw regression. It seems like that game's kind of in a rut, or that franchise is in a rut, but man, it's such a cool franchise. Let's try something different. I don't know. What do I know? Okay, we'll move on. We'll hit some community topics and gaming news. In gaming news, speaking of Assassin's Creed, we had Assassin's Creed Valhalla announced today with a, I think 8-hour stream that they showed that was a sped up creation of some artwork for the new game. And so as the artwork moved on and was completed, people could watch live and then watch it turn into what it was, to eventually reveal that it's going to be like a Viking Assassin's Creed. So I'm recording this on Wednesday. It looks like on Thursday, on April 30th, they're going to do the reveal of the game. Cool. I'm excited. I liked Odyssey and Origins a lot. Odyssey, I think it delved a little too far into the RPG. I think they should have maybe held back a bit. the thing that frustrated me the most about that game is you would do some story stuff and some plot would happen and it was cool. And then you'd be like, oh, I need to go to that island. And then you would look and you can't go to that island because you're not high enough level. And then you need to go and do some side things and do that. That Odyssey has a cool story, but the fact that I had to grind to continue in just the base story, it's awful. I hate that. So just don't level gate this one and we're good. Assassin's Creed is pretty much the only franchise that Ubisoft has that I think the RPG was a good idea. The fact that they did it to Breakpoint, to Ghost Recon, the fact that they did it to Far Cry, just blasphemy in my opinion. And I'm here calling for Division to even get turned into a not RPG. It probably won't. It's probably going to be an RPG if there's a third one. But Assassin's Creed, I love the RPG. I think it works perfectly for that franchise. And the Valhalla should be cool. Okay, well, we're gonna wrap this one up. There were some topics from Reddit, but honestly, looking at them, I don't want to talk about them. They're pointless. The biggest thing was that there was a really cool thread that had over 500 replies on the Division subreddit, where a person wrote up this big long thing like, "Hey, I know the game's not perfect, but can we be a little more civil about the way that we talk about that and treat each other?" And what was kind of a bummer is that in typical fashion, I think the message was really good. And there were definitely a few replies where I think people made a very good point of saying like, yeah, the game's very imperfect. And I think the game absolutely can be shot at. But that there is room to also maybe mention the things that are good and to not make it personal, because so much of this, I mean, I haven't looked at Twitch chat on the state of the game in probably a year and a half or 2 years. It's just useless. It only makes you angry. So why bother? And then, and even commentary just in general on Twitter and especially the subreddit. And then unfortunately in this really good post on the subreddit, it just turned into a shit show. A lot of the responses were unfortunately exactly what you would expect of people basically just trying to justify their anger towards the game and anyone who likes it or has touched it from a creation point of view. So it's kind of funny that the whole idea of the post that was a very good post was to be more civil, and unfortunately just over and over and over and over again, the weakness and kind of the toxicity of this community, albeit a very small representation of it, just showed its face, and that's a bummer. But still a really good post. If you're on the subreddit, I suggest checking it out if you can, and maybe adding some good words or good feels to that discourse. Okay, so if you like the podcast, please rate the podcast, especially on iTunes. I would very much appreciate it. It helps the podcast get noticed. If you would like to support the podcast and my other content, please check out patreon.com/theechocast. I am Von Diesel on Twitch, where I will eventually start streaming again. I plan on starting to stream again this coming Sunday, the May 3rd, I believe. And hopefully I can do that 2 or 3 times a week, especially as things start to kind of return to normal. If you want some EchoCast or Von Diesel merch, check out bondiesel.live/merch. That's all I have. So until next time.